we'll be kicking off our first LeetCode problem-solving session. For those that aren't in person, we'll be also posting this online, and we'll have it saved so you can view it at a later date. So this was the first in our series. We plan to, at the moment, do this bi-weekly. And so to start, we're going to look at the overall outline. So we have two questions. One is easy, one's considered medium. To start, we're going to look at merging two sorted lists. We'll discuss the logic as well as the implementation of this in actual Python. And then from there, we'll also look at the longest substring without repeating characters. And we'll again look at the logic and see how we can implement that in Python. But before we get started, so there's a lot of ways that you can actually access Python. So you can use the IDE on your computer. You can use Spider. You can even use Jupyter Notebook or something like Google Colab. We'll be doing everything in Google Colab because it allows us to do it in a user interface that everyone can access online. So you can actually go to this the colab.research.google.com. You can make it, as long as you have a Gmail or a Google account, you can access Google Colab, and it allows you to code in Python without having to install anything. So all the libraries that you would need that are online are accessible through Colab. And it even has its own online GPU, I believe, that you can use as well. So we'll be using that. And if anyone has any questions about that in particular, you can email one of us and we can help you get that installed. Or if you would like to actually install Python through like Anaconda, we can help you with that as well. But to start, we're going to look at the first question, which is called merge two sorted lists. I'll run through the logic on here, and I can briefly show it in Google Colab if we need to, but we took some screenshots so we can actually show you what the code looks like. So to start, our objective is we'll be given at least two lists. For this question, it's just two lists, but it'd be very simple to expand this to incorporate multiple lists. You would just have to use a larger loop. So what we want to do is we want to have two lists which are sorted already, and we want to combine them, and we want to maintain the content of the two lists and the order. So to do that, we want to start by looking at logic. So first, we'll be given two lists or vectors as input. These will contain integers that are in ascending order already. Excuse me, I apologize. Okay, so we're going to want to combine these into a single list. And this list will, again, maintain the content and the order of these two lists originally. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go through each of them and determine what value is at each node in the list. And then when we create our new list, we want to make sure that we put them in order based on their ascending numerical logical order that they have originally. And what this will do is it'll create a single output list. And again, it'll maintain all of that original content in order. So it's very simple to think about logically as a human. But then we need to know how can we transform this into a computer's way of thinking. So the first thing we need to do is break down the steps to take to develop this code. So we want to say, first, a possible condition would be that both lists are empty. Then we will return null. There's the possibility that one list has numbers and one doesn't. So then we want to return the list that has numbers since the first list has nothing. And there's also the condition where both lists contain values. So first we want to check those conditions and see before we start. From there, we can determine that both have values in them. We need to find which one has the smallest starting value. This allows us to see where our loop needs to start. And then we want to iterate through each of these lists. And we want to append the values from each list into a new list based on their order through each iteration. So if it's a smaller value in one list than the other list, that one gets added first. And then it'll look again and say, is the next value in that list still smaller than the other list? If not, it'll add from the other list. And then finally, once we've gone through one or both of the lists, if there's one list that's longer than the other, any of those remaining values will just get appended to our list because those should all be greater than the first list. And then finally, we'll output our new list. A couple things to note, there are some constraints on the website. The first of which is that there has to be between 0 and 50 numbers in each list. And then each number has between -100 and 100. And then that both the first list and second list are ordered in non-decreasing order. And these constraints are just constraints for this problem. So if you were doing this in another application, this may not necessarily be the case. But for this particular challenge, these are the constraints we have to follow. And they're pretty simple. So actually implementing it into Python, the first thing, like I said, we want to do is we want to check that these lists are empty. So what we have here is basically an if-else-if statement. And we're checking if the length of the first list is 0, then the second list will be what we use. If the length of the second list is 0, then we'll use the first list as our output. I did not include here, but you could also add an elif statement if both of them. So you would say length of list 1 equals 0 and length of list 2 equals 0. Then you could return something like print no list. But that was left out because we're just assuming that both lists do have values. The second step will be to iterate through both of these lists using a while loop. And we want to start that condition by saying, checking that both of them are not equal to 0. And then from there, we say while we're in list 1 and 2, if the first value inside of each list is less than 1, or it's the first value of the first list is less than the first value of the second list, we want to append that value to our new list. And the other condition is that's not true, where the second list value is smaller than the first list. Then in that case, we want to take that second list value and append it to our new list. The special character to note here is this .pop function. And what this is doing is it's taking that value and it's letting us append that value and it's dropping it from the original list. So that essentially, when we go through the next iteration, the first position is now going to be the value that was there previously, the second value previously. So now we're comparing the next position in whichever list we just dropped from, if that makes sense. So what we're doing is we're basically iterating through each list and deleting values as we remove them. So it's a way to kind of keep our data clean and minimize the number of variables we have. And from there, once we have gone through both lists, or we say, in this case, list 1 is shorter than list 2. Once we've gone through list 1, we'll just take all the values from list 1 or from list 2 that we did not iterate through, and we'll just append them to the end of our new list, because these are all going to be larger than any values in list 1. So that was one way that we can do it. Let me show the time real quick. The time for this one was like 0.007 of a second to run. However, we can also simplify this implementation. So one thing that LeetCode does is it likes to get you to do this manually. And once you solve these challenges manually. So it doesn't really explain how you can use libraries or packages that already exist on Python, but from an application standpoint, especially if we're looking at industry, we know that time is money and time is very valuable. So instead of spending all that time writing a while loop or a for loop, what we could do is still check those conditions if the length of the list is greater than 0 and check that, make sure that we do have numbers at list. But once we do that, we can actually use a built-in function called sorted. So what we can do is we can add the two lists together, and then we can use a sorted function to sort them in ascending order. Now, it's important to know that this would only work if the outcome of this code, the sorted list, it did not matter how you got to that point. As long as the outcome was you wanted a sorted list based on the values in these two lists, this would work. So this is just highlighting that it's important to understand the exact outcome you want and then look at the multiple ways that you can get there. So you could code it manually, going through a while loop, or you could use a built-in function, or you could go on Google and find a library that's been written already to accomplish that same goal, and that might save you some time. So it just shows you don't have to be an expert at writing the back-end code. You can still get to the same end goal using some cheats or some packages that you can download off the internet. So it's not always a bad thing, but sometimes it's important to know how to get through and do some of the back-end stuff. So that's just running through the first question. It's relatively simple. Just kind of get our feet wet with that. And so I'm going to hand it off to Christian. He's going to go through our question 2. Or is there any questions? Okay. Yeah, we'll go off to question 2.
Hi, everyone. Now we'll move on to question 2, which we'll be looking into a more complex problem, which is the longest substring within repeating characters. So the objective of this is, given a string S, we will find out the length of the longest substring without repeating a character. So a string is a sequence of characters and symbols that can be seen in all languages, and a substring is a subset of original string. These characters and symbols are also referred to as Unicode. And we're looking to find, so in this problem, we are looking to find a substring that starts with a character and goes to the longest distance without repeating that same character. If we get to the end of this string and we do not repeat a character, we will move on to the next following character. So our example here is that we've given the string of letters in the input. We get the output is A, B, C with a length of 3. So you can see that in this in this problem, we will be iterating through the whole string and finding that once the longest string from the first A to the longest A, if then into the next A is 3, but it's also the same from the first B to the second B, and we iterate through that whole string to determine which one has the longest length. So the complexity of this problem is increased, and with it, I try to create a flow chart to model what is going on. So given we get these strings, we have to first initialize 2 iteration points, which is two iteration values, which is I and J. And we want and this is the I starting as being the start position and J being the following position, and then S denotes our string, and we use these indexing symbols to start at I and J of our points within the string, and then we determine the length of the string. So as we take our input, we will go to the first block, at which we determine if SI character is equal to SJ character. If it is not, we will determine if we've reached the end of the string, and if not, we'll add another value. This is our inner loop, and it'll flow back up to the top. If they do equal, we will add the points between SI. We will append the points between SI and SJ to the list, and then we'll break that loop. And if I has reached the end of its list, we will print that max count, which would be the output integer length and the substring. So for example, if we took the second one, which is just a string of B's, we would take that input. We'll take that input. Sorry, there's technical difficulties. We will take that input and feed that string through the first block, and since the second B value is equal, the first B value is equal to the second B value, we'll say yes, and then we'll add those two values together. We'll append those two lists and break, and then send that count, which the longest length of that list was just 1. And that will continue that process. I have also an example to maybe highlight what is going on a little bit better with the outer and inner loop that consists inside here, where we start with the outer loop will just start with the first value in the string, and the inner loop will start with the values following, and then we'll iterate one iteration, second iteration, third iteration until we meet that value that matches the first character in the list, and then we will break and then loop through the outer loop again, starting at B instead of A, and then we'll loop second string, first string, second string. But since we do not find our next iteration, we do not append that list. So I'll move on to the coding practice for this. So here's the more general idea, where we start with 0, and then we iterate through. We will start with our first index, which is A, and then we determine the length, and then we will save the previous characters. After that, we will enter a loop or iteration through the rest of the values within the first string. So here we've got our code for this problem that has a single loop, and then we'll have conditional statements at which if the values are the same, or if not, we'll continue through the looping process. So with that, we'll get that answer is ABC with the length of 3. So why are we not done with this? So we've only iterated through from the start position to the rest of the positions in the string. So we want to follow up with if we try a different input that gets rid of that second A, it goes throughout the whole string and determines the length is 6, which would be incorrect because we're repeating values. We're repeating the B values throughout this list. So we want to move. So the next step will be adding another loop in which we will iterate through the start positions and change the start positions as we move. Change the start positions to check to see if there's any following repeating characters. So we find the length of S, we loop through the start characters, then we save those previous characters, and then we'll loop through the following characters of that list. And so here's the solution that we found here. For that, we'll produce the correct answer, given that we got rid of the second index for A. So what are the challenges with this approach? That this code here is very computationally expensive due to multiple conditions, and then we use we'll be using some max statements and other functions that increase complexity. So through further research, we found that we can reduce some of the complexity by removing some of these conditional statements and then applying a longest string count variable that will store information in a less complex way than a list. And then once we find that information, we will move on to the once we find the highest count, we will break our loops. So with that, we thank you guys for joining us on our first LeetCode session. Any questions?
For question 1 or question 2, or in forms in general. I check chat. Okay, so that wraps up the day. Just a couple announcements. I believe not this Tuesday, but I believe next Tuesday. Let me pull up my calendar real quick. We will have another event. This will be on. I apologize.